Hello again, friends, and happy Memorial Day if you are in the United States celebrating Memorial Day today or listening on the Monday that Memorial Day actually takes place.
I forgot about that. I was just thinking Memorial Day is a holiday and everybody around the world would understand why that I'm not mailing out any Cornette's collectibles, but they don't know that we have Memorial Day. So Monday, we got no post office. I can't do anything about it, folks. It's going to take at least another day. All right, go ahead.
When I was younger, I always got Memorial Day and Labor Day confused. Which one was which? Which one was at the beginning of summer? Which one was at the end of summer?
Well, yeah, it was always confusing to me because on Labor Day, nobody works either.
That's right. No Labor Day. So, but in case you haven't figured it out yet, you're listening to the most professional wrestling podcast out there today, Jim Cornette's Drive-Thru. And what we do is we answer your questions, which are sent a number of times in a number of ways, either on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru or via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com. But before we begin this happy show, let me introduce myself. I am your host, the great Brian Last, and the man who will be answering your questions, the star of the Drive-Thru, the star of many Drive-Thrus, from what I understand, Mr. Jim Cornette.
Well, you know, that was actually a pretty serviceable introduction.
I don't know how.
So I have to, and just moments ago, you were just tearing your hair out and bouncing off the walls. You know, somebody also said on Twitter, I saw this insulting you. Well, you're some fat guy sitting in your basement.
That's right.
I want you people to know that Brian Last is in amazing physical condition. Brian Last is a studly young man. You could have been a male like clothing model for these upscale fashion type of catalogs they do for these big chain stores that cater to the upscale gentleman. You got the nice build there, the wonderful physique. You're a very handsome young man.
Well, thank you. I will say, though, since the last time you've seen me and I started podcasting and I've got into my 30s and I've had multiple kids, I have gained a few pounds, but I still am.
Oh, no. Now, come on. After I give you that big deal, you're going to say, now, yeah, I'm just about 275 right now, Jim.
Oh, no, let's not go crazy or anything, but
but
I am a very, very handsome man, yes.
I've never seen you out of shape or unkempt in any way.
I'm probably now that I think about it, I'm probably more unkempt than you've ever seen me because I like to grow my facial hair.
Well, I've seen you with a little facial hair, but it was always, well trimmed. You did the manscaping before manscaped.com came along, trademark.
It's not. Is it manscaping if you're doing it to your face?
Well, it's part of your scape. Whether it's chin or crotch or crack, chin, crotch, or crack, it's all part of your scape, baby.
Is anyone still listening to this?
This isn't even a commercial, folks. No, we're both slappy. Brian has had an incredibly rough time this week. He's been under stress, and I had stress yesterday. I'll tell the people it's okay now, but yesterday she was in rough shape. Little Harley Quinn had to go to the doctor on Saturday morning, Memorial Day weekend. The wonderful Blue Pearl Animal Clinic down here, 24/7, 365, expert veterinarians and care. We can't recommend them enough. They're very wonderful people. But she got poopy, and then she pooped a little blood, and Daddy was freaking out, and Mommy's, at her mom's and at Grandma's house, and so I throw her in the car along with the pee pad that had contained the evidence of what she had done in case they needed to analyze anything. And I throw that in a plastic bag and I scoop baby up and put her in the seat on the blankie. And we over there, I almost had sirens going. If I had a fucking siren, I would have had it going. But apparently she got a stomach bug and there's a lot of blood vessels and she may have strained too hard because they did a complete blood panel. They said, well, there's this one test we can check to see if, whatever her blood oxygen, make sure she's not poisoning herself or something. But there's another test to give us more information, but it's more. I said, I don't care if you need to send her to the Mayo Clinic. I'm booking the fucking jet. Just do what you need to do, right? It's baby. And 15 minutes later, she gets antibiotics and carrots, bland food for a day, and already things have firmed up, and there's no more bleeding because she's had carrots. It's a little orange, But otherwise, it just for all of her fans, you know, she has 1,000 followers on Twitter at Quinn for Harley Quinn Cornette. Some wonderful, cute pictures of her and some statements that she's made in the past about how gorgeous she is. But anyway, my goal originally was for my dog to have more followers than Shitstain on Twitter, but I just don't have time to keep it up. But anyway, so everything's good now, and she's sleeping it off today. She's right over here taking a nap, and she's on carrots and water for another 12 hours or so, and she got to keep taking her antibiotic this week. But Daddy was scared. I don't know how people have children. Because especially before they reach the age where they can tell you what's wrong either, because then you got to guess.
It's easier to figure out with a baby than it is with a small animal or any animal, just because that's the worst feeling is when you sense that your animal is ill and you don't know what the hell's going on. Like
yes.
With a baby, you're like, okay, well, I know what it means when I grab my ear. That means her ear must hurt too. So it's much more scary with an animal, I think.
Well, I forgot that babies can grab their ears or their noses or whatever. Well,
their chins, their cracks,
no, it's chins, crotches, and cracks. But here's the thing. Anyway, so we know that Harley Quinn, and she was licking some deer poop several days ago. So I told him that may have had some. But anyway, she's feeling better now. But if she had been poisoned, you know what I would have had to have done.
No. What would you have done? Suck the poison out?
The first time I start to bring up the fucking segue instead of you and you don't fucking bite on it, I'll tell you what I would have done if she had been...
Good job. I didn't even realize that's what you were doing.
If she had been inadvertently poisoned by some big corporation like Monsanto and their Roundup. There was recently a $2 billion verdict for a couple in California who got cancer from use of industrial strength Roundup, and Monsanto had to pay up because they had hidden the risks of this cancer-causing lawn care item for years. And I'll have you know that our good friend, your good close personal friend, my good close personal friend, a friend of the people, Stephen P. New and the law offices of Stephen P. New, that's newlawoffice.com. What's that number, Brian?
888-692-8084.
Yeah, I was going to say it with you. 8084.
Well, hold on. We can't trample over the number. That's part of the plug. 888-692-8084.
See, I was going to fucking say it with you, but you said 0 instead of O, and it just screwed the whole thing up. But anyway, he is currently representing landscapers, golf course groundskeepers, other people who have come in contact with this on a regular basis that could at this point be falling apart from leprosy are now they have a recourse. They have somebody to be on their side, but I swear I'm not making this up because I just talked to Stephen the other day, and he is starting to get the first of cases from the diabetes drug Invokana. Have you heard what Invokana invokes in some people as a side effect?
I heard a little bit about it actually in my recent call with Steve as well, and boy, it's pretty frightening.
I'm glad you didn't say it so I could say it. Genital gangrene.
Yeesh.
Folks, they made a drug to treat your diabetes that gives you genital gangrene. And it was approved and rushed to market anyway, even though it was known, so it is alleged, and I believe they can prove this, that it was known to carry that risk. And West Virginia, one of the highest states for diabetes, and all of a sudden, people are developing horrible sores and having to have their genitals removed surgically because of these giant multi-billion-dollar drug companies foisting this shit off on us, giving us the highest drug prices in the world, in the known civilized world, and then your fucking crotch rots. And then all you got your chin and your crack. But diabetes medicine should not result in, and this is women too. I'm not talking about just the the male side of the fence, women also. So anyway, Stephen has taken those cases and opioid cases all over the country, and the 3M combat earplugs. They made defective combat earplugs for vets or service members. So anyway, but Stephen does want to mention to the Cult of Cornette members, he is gratified for the response. There's been several cases, and we won't obviously talk about his private business, but several cases from the cult members that Stephen has taken on over the last few months, but he wants to apologize. He can't practice in Australia. He's had people, because we got the worldwide reach. He's been contacted by a lot of people. He can't practice in Australia. He loves people to reach out to him. Sometimes he can, tweet you or advise you on something to do at the local level by somebody you know, or if he doesn't specialize in this particular case. But thank you for thinking of Stephen P. New and the new law office first. But he can't go to Australia.
Can't go to Australia.
Legally he can, but he can't practice in all. You know what I'm saying? He can't practice in Australia. But anyway, yes, genital gangrene, opioid-addicted babies, Monsanto-caused cancer, all this and more. Stephen is fighting for your rights. If you need to sue, as they say on MLW every week, call Stephen P. New.
That's right. Someone did just write to me, Jim, and they said they heard you mention him again on MLW's television show.
Well, no, actually, Rich Bikini brought him up. This was last week, I think. Well, because he's well known as being my attorney, and also he was standing over the back of us there with a club to Rich's head. No, it just everybody knows that Stephen P. New is becoming a celebrity attorney in our world that will obviously come to better end than the last celebrity attorney that we liked, poor Michael Avenatti, who apparently is just fucking up royally. And I had high hopes for that boy. He Buddy Landel'd himself.
Boy, even Buddy never fell that fast, that hard.
That's true. That was a big fucking drop. But anyway, speaking of big drops and people that ought to be sued, and trademark, all of this comes into, there's one question I got, this week on Twitter, and so I couldn't keep track of it. I didn't jot it down, but the gist of it is, apparently there was a podcast or a shoot interview or somewhere out there in the world over the last week or two, or maybe just that this guy just heard, where the fake Razor Ramon from the WWF in 1996 was knocking me. Said, Cornette, he's a fucking big mouth. He took credit for everything or something like that. Which is not exactly the worst shit that anybody's ever said about me, but I was like, what the fuck? Because I didn't even know this guy was still alive, to be honest, and I have not. I thought we'd go into because this is, all in all, one of the worst wrestling angles, ideas, gimmicks, just one of the worst things foisted off on wrestling television for a variety of reasons over the last 3 decades, at least. And I thought we'd talk a little bit about it. That's what brought it up, but basically, the guy's name, we'll talk about the person first, and we'll go back and talk about the angle. But the guy's name, as I recall, is Rick Bogner. Is that it? That's right?
Yeah, he was the gladiator in FMW, right?
No, wasn't that Mike Awesome?
I thought the gladiator was Mike Awesome's partner.
Well, fuck, I don't know, but no, wasn't there a big Titan? Or am I thinking it completely? Okay, you see where we're going with this, folks. This guy, and I'm not knocking him. I've never had a crossword with him because I had interaction with him for like 3 months in 1996 at TV tapings and as I'm going to mention, a couple of training sessions. And otherwise, I've never talked to this guy. I don't know where the fuck he is. I believe he was from Canada. I think from Calgary or that area. So I don't know what the fuck was said. I don't know this guy, but all I heard was this guy said, he said you were a big mouth and you took credit for everything. Well, big mouth. Yeah, I guess I kind of am, but the only thing that I can think of, I wasn't walking around the locker room talking to the fucking, preliminary talent about all the shit that I came up with on the show, especially since most of the shit I came up with on the show, I didn't come up with on the show and I was embarrassed about it. However, I have told the story in the past, and in different places, but since we got so many new listeners of how they picked me, by they, I mean, it was either Vince McMahon or JR, one or the other of them, had called me and asked me to teach Rick Bogner and Glenn Jacobs, who is now obviously Mayor Kane, how to be Razor Ramon and Diesel. Because that's where the famous line about when I got the Diesel tapes from the fucking studio, they got me about 6, 7 matches, and I sat down and started jotting down what he did. I came up with the 6 moves, counting the hair flip. And that's a famous clip on the various internets. But anyway, that's the only time I've ever interacted with this guy. He worked for the outlaw indie promotions that they had in Japan in the 90s, which was kind of like the equivalent of what we had, shortly afterwards. Just, they did some screwy things and they used whatever talent they could get because they weren't paying New Japan and All Japan money. And, except if you were Terry Funk or whatever and Onita. And so they got what they got. So this guy had made somewhat of a name with the newsletter readers for 90s independent Japanese wrestling. Otherwise than that, help me, did he work anywhere or have any other run doing it? And maybe in Germany somewhere? Do I remember he worked Germany?
The big thing I remember him from is being the Big Titan in FMW and then being the fake Razor. And then I really don't know anything else about the guy's career.
So he was the Big Titan.
He was the Big Titan.
Okay, I even knew more. Okay, so between the two of us, us savants of wrestling, that's the point. This guy was in the Federal Witness Protection Program in the wrestling business, but he had sent a tape in, and he looked somewhat. He wasn't as tall as Scott Hall, but he was tall. And he didn't have the size of Scott Hall weight-wise, but he was big, kind of. And he could look like, if he combed his hair right, Razor Ramon. And Glenn Jacobs had been, goddamn it, Dr. Isaac Yankem, the evil dentist with the Richard Keel jaws and fucking James Bond movies teeth. And thankfully that had flopped, or it would have killed Glenn's career if it had gone any longer. But then here comes this. And by the way, Vince McMahon had nerve to say to me and Bruce, because Shitstain wasn't around yet, in a creative meeting after this thing was over with, well, if that Glenn Jacobs can't come up with a killer instinct, we're just going to have to let him go. Because Vince had put this fucking 7-foot guy with this incredible physique and no bad habits, and obviously intelligent fucking guy, and a model employee. He'd given him the 2 of the stupidest gimmicks in the history of the WWF, and then was thinking about letting him go because Glenn was out there embarrassed to be doing what he was doing and felt awkward as fuck. So he didn't have the proper killer instinct as an evil dentist and a fucking rip-off gimmick. Anyway, so here's how this happened. And I had to go back and look at, because I didn't even have this in my books. I'll tell you why in a minute. Graham Cawthon's History of Professional Wrestling, WWF 90 through 99 book to pinpoint these dates. I'm on the creative team, me and Bruce Pritchard, working with Vince McMahon. It's September of 1996. And I'm also managing Vader still, and that's when I was doing a deal with Jose Lothario, coming off of the SummerSlam thing and all that stuff. I'm, in some cases, on the road doing manager matches with Jose, right? So we go to Vince's house for our normal writing day. It was probably the Wednesday after Labor Day in September. So was that the 3rd-ish or whatever? And we turned to the next TV taping is a ways off. So we're still working on, concepts and things. I think the next pay-per-view was September 22nd. That was Mind Games in Philly, where Cactus and Michaels. So we don't have set formats down, but we have, because we've already taped some Raw a few weeks previous. But anyway, this was when they had started. Remember the Live Wire show that was live on USA on Saturday mornings for a little while, where they were just at the studio and they read emails as there was starting to be such a thing, and showed no wrestling on a wrestling program and couldn't figure out why nobody was watching it.
Unfortunately, yeah. Unfortunately, I do remember it. Yes.
Yeah, Todd Pettingill, I think, was the host. I did a segment with Shitstain and Michael Hayes one time on there where Hayes and I were both laughing at Idiot, who was trying to play a heel fucking wrestling personality. But anyway, so I leave the meeting on Wednesday. Thursday is my packing day or whatever. I go out for the weekend. And I work with Jose in Austin, Texas on the Friday night, Houston, Texas, and Austin on a Thursday, Houston on a Friday. That's what it was. Because then Dallas is on Saturday, and then the guys have seen or heard what's happened on this live wire show. Because I'm in Oklahoma, Tulsa, and Oak City on the 8th, which is Sunday, matinee and evening show. And I'm on the creative team. And so all the guys, as soon as I walk in the building, come up, and they're saying, so what? Razor and Diesel are coming back. They're going to be back on fucking Raw, or they're coming back whenever they said it was going to be in a week or two. Jim Ross is bringing Razor and I said, what are you fucking talking about? Well, they announced it on TV. I don't know anything about this. I don't know what yours. No, Nash and Hall are not coming back. They've signed contracts down there. Well, but they said, well, come to find out, then I call Bruce, right? I'm going, why the fuck? What the fuck is it? Well, Corny, Vince had an idea. Somewhere in the 2 days before the weekend, Vince McMahon sitting on the toilet or whatever, I would blame this on Shitstain, but this is before he actually became a member of the creative team. He was just bothering us all in the office as the editor of the magazine, being a mark. Vince sitting on the toilet had the idea, I made Razor and Diesel. I own the names. I own the characters. It doesn't matter who plays them. We're going to show them. We're going to make new Razor and Diesel, make them stars. And this was when he was trying to, whatever the fuck he had going on with JR, where I'm sure he had heard JR talking in private or, at the studio or in the car or wherever, like we all did. Every single Southern citizen that ever moved up there would cuss Connecticut. This fucking traffic, this fucking overpriced hellhole. This goddamn, just the whole thing was just uncomfortable for all of us. And JR liked it probably just a little teeny bit better than me. And so that's when JR came out and did the promo about the overpriced hellhole or whatever the fuck. And they tried to turn him heel. I guess to get people mad at him so they could phase him off the TV. That was another one of the 15,000 times Kevin Dunn, thought we should go with the young-looking guys like Michael Cole 20 years ago did look young, and he'd had a real news background, but he was also the shits for quite a while. And he's the shits whenever they produce him now. I heard him on his own. He actually did okay. But so Jim Ross is going to bring the fake Razor and Diesel. And by the time that I get back the following week to Connecticut and go back to the office or next writing meeting or whatever, I'm told that, okay, it's going to be Razor and it's going to be Diesel, played by Rick Bogner, who I'd heard of because I read The Observer. I'd never fucking seen him, but he looks like Razor. And Glenn, I was obviously pulling for because here's a main event talent, but at the same time, I can smell this fucking gimmick stinking a mile down the road. It's ridiculous, but Vince is going to do this. That's why I said of all the Vince McMahon ideas, this is the one that I'd love to be able to blame on Shitstain because it was so rotten. So then that's when I get the phone call. Well, Nash and Hall are already gone. They're not going to, sit on the phone and tell these guys how to be them. So they asked me to call the studio and get 5 or 6 matches of each guy and then take Bogner and Glenn to the studio where they had the ring set up and try to teach them how to be Razor and Diesel. And it was actually easier with Bogner because Scott Hall, Razor Ramon did more. He actually could work when he wanted to, and he did more shit. And, just the shitty looking slappy punch thing, he had to do. But otherwise, that was not that bad. And Bogner was serviceable as a in-ring worker. But it was double bad for Glenn because Glenn can do all these things. And Glenn is an athletic giant. And he's not a fucking, what was Nash at the time? Almost 40-year-old fucking guy with bad knees then that didn't do anything. 6 moves with the hair flip. So here, Glenn, Bogner was never going to be a fucking star. If he was going to be, he would have either been by then or he would have been afterwards when he left the company. He never did another fucking thing. So I was upset that Glenn was stuck in this, but I was at least, Bogner has more to work with to work like Scott Hall. And they had the matches, and I took them to the studio and they learned some things, and we didn't have any words, and they had the matches as best they could, and it was a horrible fucking thing, and they shortly afterwards cut it off. And then because all they needed Bogner for was somebody that looked like Scott Hall, they didn't need him anymore because he didn't impress anybody. But Glenn, they finally, Bruce was pulling for the fucking thing with the Undertaker's younger brother. As soon as I heard about it, I was fucking over the moon about it because we could make that work. And that's something he could shine in, his own deal. And obviously JR was a big supporter of Glenn. So he, was wholeheartedly. So once they found the thing, Glenn was $1 million talent. Rick Bogner, they didn't need, they never used again because what the fuck? There was 100 guys that good. So if he got mad because I took credit, such as it was, for teaching him how to work like fucking Razor Ramon in 2 afternoons at the fucking studio, that just goes to show you that there were few career highlights in his fucking trajectory.
Where did all this come from? I mean, because I all of a sudden I saw something sent to me, and it seemed, what did he say, that you take credit for everything and you think you know everything?
It was something. Well, the guy that tweeted me said he's a big mouth or a loud mouth and likes to take credit for everything. Okay. I gladly give somebody else. That's why I wanted to clear up, because I had no involvement whatsoever with one of the worst episodes in the history of wrestling television, whether you want to call it an angle or a gimmick or whatever the fuck. Except that I was told by my employer to try to teach this fucking putz we just brought in from Canada how to fucking wrestle like Razor Ramon.
My employer gave me a role to play.
That's exactly what they did. And it was a lousy role and they were lousy at it. And thank God Glenn got out of it that may be the problem, because here's a guy whose partner has gone on to worked for the WWF continuously for over 20 years, make 7 figures a year on several occasions, and is now mayor of a mid-sized American city, and he's doing some fucking guy's podcast from wherever the fuck he may be. I don't know.
Did anyone back up Vince? When Vince said, I'm going to do this, I think it'll work. Did anyone say, yeah, it'll be great?
Well, as soon as Bruce figured out that, he wasn't going to be able to talk Vince out of it, because as happy, as excited as Vince was about it, then he was like, yeah, we can make this work. And that's what Diesel would do or whatever the fuck. But, I don't know why it was just something like somehow he either thought, I'm going to make these guys stars and prove that I could have done it with anybody, which is not the case. I'm surprised he was able to do it with fucking Nash, be honest with you. And actually, Nash got to be the megastar when he left the WWF and went to WCW, just because of new environment.
He at least had charisma, though.
But he had the charisma, and also he could talk his ass off, not on television, but in the fucking meetings. But I don't know why he thought that was gonna. So he either thought he was gonna make them stars and prove he could do it for anybody, or perhaps he thought it would in some way devalue Nash and Hall down there. I have no idea. But Nash and Hall were already, as themselves, much more over than Razor and Diesel were. Because when you think about it, Razor Ramon and Diesel were some goofy fucking gimmicks themselves that they had to overcome to get over at that point in time. It was so 80s. Because Vince was still, Razor started, I guess, in the 80s, maybe early 90s. But it was just, Diesel, wah, wah, and the big truck coming. No, yeah. Even I could see when you had a 7-foot fucking smartass like that, he could have got a ton more heat if he didn't just Big Daddy Cool Diesel, And even with that, and he came up, I think, with the Big Daddy Cool just to make himself a little more palatable than Diesel, like Diesel and fucking Mastodon and Mentor. Fucking
he
hell.
did get the most you can get out of that name Diesel.
Yeah. He did do that.
Yeah. Well, let's get another question in here, Jim. This one was sent into...
Anyway, by the way, sorry, Rick Bogner, wherever you... Good night to Rick Bogner, wherever you may be.
Wherever you are bogged down.
Yes, down in obscurity, Alberta.
Our next question was sent in via email to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Thomas. I am friends with Duke the Dumpster Droese on Facebook. He recently posted a story about how in mid-1996 at a show in Louisville, him and Aldo Montoya had to wrestle for 45 minutes because the rest of the roster was late to the venue. Is there any truth to this? If not, do you have any good Duke Droese stories?
Oh, well, it's better than that. It's better than that. There's much more truth to it than that. We're in Louisville, but on this particular weekend, I'm managing Vader, so I'm on the road this weekend, but all the guys flew into Indianapolis because that was the central point for the weekend's, tour, right? But since we're that close to Louisville, I've come to Louisville a day or two early. So I'm already in town. And also at the time I'm on the creative team and I'm one of the agents. So I do have some type of administrative power in case shit starts going south. And boy, it did real quick. So I get to the Gardens bright and early so I still, visited some of the staff there and everything and said hello and excuse me. Well, then it starts getting time where Jack Lanza, because Jack was the agent that night that was in charge of the card, Jack Lanza should have been there, and maybe Tony Gurria might have been coming with him, or maybe it was Dave Hebner. I think it might have been Dave Hebner. It was going to do the box office, and they ain't there. And then the boys don't start coming in. Well, then I think somebody but remember, there's no cell phones, right? So I think somebody had called the Gardens. It may have been Jack Lanza saying that their flight to Indianapolis had been delayed and they had just landed or were just on the way. And it's like an hour before showtime, right? And Indianapolis is 2 hours and they're going to be driving as fast as they can. Anyway, this is what I hear. Well, somehow Duke the Dumpster Droese, I think maybe because he was coming from somewhere else, and PJ, which name was he? He was Aldo Montoya then, Just Incredibles, how most people know him, PJ Walker, who was just starting out with the company then, as Aldo Montoya, the Portuguese sensation with the fucking part mask. I don't know, they tried to fucking kill him too.
Portuguese man of war.
Yeah, then he should have been wearing a horse head. I don't fucking know. Anyway, so somehow their travel has been different from everybody else. Maybe they're just joining the tour or whatever, and they got to the building. They weren't on the flights that everybody else was on. It was delayed in Indianapolis. So, and then I think we may have had a local referee. I don't remember who the referee was, or you know what? We had a referee or two because the ring crew guys like the Jack Dones and those guys, the ring was there because they drove. So the ring crew guys were also, so we had referees. So fuck. And I've called Bruce in Connecticut and I've told him, hey, what the fuck? I'm going to, do something here. Well, yeah, just keep it going, Corny. They're all calling in saying they're going to be there. So at 7:30, I've prepped the ring announcer. And the first match is Aldo Montoya versus Duke the Dumpster Droese. And hold on, I'll get you the results in the book that I was just using a minute ago.
Very good.
Wait a minute. Hold on. Shit, now I forgot I don't know the fucking date.
Accuracy matters here.
Accuracy matters. I'm managing Vader. It was June 27, 1996. As a matter of fact, according to the attendance was 3,256 people. And boy, did they get sick of fucking Duke Droese and Aldo Montoya and Jim Cornette, because now I've got the card here, now that I've taken this brief break. So first, Duke Droese, and by the way, they're both fucking baby faces, right?
Yeah.
On television. Well, but first, Duke Droese beats Aldo Montoya. Then, in a long match. Then Nobody's there. So when they come back, I said, okay, boys, follow me back out. And I don't even know whether I explained to them what we were going to fucking do. They follow me back. Well, they don't all just walk out there, but we have the entrance again because I come out with Duke Droese and I say that is, Aldo Montoya goes out and says there's no way that I can possibly be beaten again. And I come out with Duke Droese or some shit. And anyway, I cut a promo to give him a chance to breathe. And then they have another fucking match. And this match goes a long time. And then Aldo wins, right? And then we come back and I'm fucking blowed up now. And I'm looking around and Vader walks in. And Vader later on is supposed to work with, goddamn, who was he supposed to? It was with Michaels, Shawn Michaels. That was the main event. So I said, come on, follow me, Leon. So Vader has an entrance. And I go out and I cut a promo with Vader for 10 minutes about what we're going to do later on. And then we go back to the back and there's still nobody. And I said, we'll call for a 10-minute intermission. And right about the time that they call for the intermission and people start getting a beer, which they badly needed, here comes Jack Lanza and Dave Hebner, and here comes Sam. The boys just start flooding in during that intermission. And I was, at the time, I was easily 250, 260 pounds because I've been Connecticut aggravation eating for 6 months at that point. And I am so bloated, and it's the middle of fucking June in Louisville, and the Garden's air conditioning was not that great. And I've been wearing that suit out there, and Jack Lanza looked at me and laughed. He said it was like somebody turned a bucket of water over my fucking head. But I think Duke Droese and Aldo Montoya and me talking about challenging again and all that stuff, and the promo with Vader was the first hour and like 10 minutes of the show that night. Oof. But that nobody left, and then they got all their matches. And, of course, Michaels even went shorter, so he didn't have to get jerked around by Vader as much because the show was running long. So he was happy even. But holy fuck.
Do you have any other Duke the Dumpster Droese stories?
Not like any heinous, horrible things or whatever. He was a nice guy. He was from Florida. He had worked down there on the Independence and was hoping, I don't know if he was Duke the Dumpster Droese. He may have had a garbage man gimmick now that I come to think of it. But, he was a nice guy and he was a good big kid and he was a good worker. It's just that he was one of those guys that all of that period of time, 94, 95, 96, 97, everybody they brought in practically, they just made him so cartoony and gimmicky that, people remember those guys now at the Fan Fest, oh yeah, kind of a chuckle from the 90s, but they were doomed at the time to not be able to draw money because everybody saw those as the filler, the cartoon guys, the underneath guys, preliminary guys, the guys on the card that you didn't take seriously. And few of them could have drawn some money if they'd have, not everybody was Kevin Nash being able to get the most out of Diesel.
Our next question, Jim, was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Sober Wrestling. I've been watching NWA 1987, and I see guys like Lasertron and Bobby Eaton are classified as high flyers. Do you think more athletic and spectacular guys like Will Ospreay and Ricochet could have gotten over during that time?
Well, that's a difficult question. Not as they are today mentally, especially. Potentially physically, yes, but not as they view the business and their place in it and what they should be doing today. They would have never been allowed to do any of that to begin with by the promoters who were smarter than the wrestlers. First of all, Hector Guerrero was a high flyer. He was obviously very lucha influenced, but, famous, the Guerrero family, one of the most famous families in Mexican and in Southwestern United States wrestling history. And Hector could do the dives and the planchas and those fancy ankle flying head scissors that he used to do, not like Ricky or Robert Gibson where they'd go up and, sideways and do the thigh leg scissors, but he would leap up and put each ankle around the guy's neck while he was standing there and then turn in midair and his ankles would spin the fucking guy. It was cool. It was cool shit. He didn't do too much. He did flashy stuff, and then he sold for the bigger heels, and then he made fiery comebacks. Hector was a great worker. Dusty made him Lasertron because he kind of, I guess he wanted a video game character for the kids, because even then they were trying to copy, we'll get some of the kids from Vince, because, he had the ice cream bars. I think we should have bribed the kids with ice cream rather than made Hector Guerrero Lasertron. But Bobby Eaton was thought of as a high flyer because he came off the top rope with all that stuff. But the thing is, people forget that Bobby was he took big bumps and he came off the top rope, but he was the same size as everybody else that wasn't a high flyer. That's why it was unusual and why he was, people were awestruck to watch him do it because he was a grown guy doing those things off the top rope, but he also, did every other spot. Flying was not his repertoire per se. It was the amazing moves he did in the middle of all the other stuff he did. So he wasn't really a high flyer. But Will Ospreay and Ricochet, they would have an issue, obviously, with their size. But the thing is, you would have 20 different territories that some booker in one of them would say, I'm going to make a Tiger Mask ripoff if it was the right era, or I'm going to make a masked guy that's going to do cool moves, and he's going to be, upper middle card because the kids are going to like him, but so are a lot of the fucking adults because he's flashy, and you give him enough wins to keep him over and keep people invested in him, but then also the top heels slaughter him because that's getting them heat, get ready for they wouldn't have been main event guys because of the size issue. But also, if they were athletically as talented then as they are now, but were brought into the business then so they understood their role, they understood when they were doing too much, and when it became synchronized swimming or floor gymnastics instead of wrestling, and the veterans would have reined them in and explained that to them. And either one of them, yes, and especially Ricochet, because he especially with a mask, he could carry off a fucking Rey Mysterio type of gimmick, for lack of a better term. Ricky Morton was, 5'9" and 195. He looked a little bit bigger, but his main thing was selling. If they sold and didn't immediately pop up and do outrageous shit and get fired at the time, then both those guys could have had a spot on the cards in used the right way, but neither one, because the size issue, and also because you had to be able to cut a promo, which I haven't seen from either guy. And also you had to look somewhat physically intimidating, facially as well as size-wise, to be a main event guy in those days. No, they wouldn't have been main event guys, but you could have used them if they were thinking for the time period rather than the shit that they do now just because they can. Remember, just because you can cut your own ear off doesn't mean you're Van Gogh, and just because you can buy the airplane doesn't mean you know how to fly it.
All right, well, we'll move on from there. We'll see if we can fly this plane and not into a cliff. Jim,
That's why I always like to sit in the back. Did you ever hear of a plane backing into a mountain?
No, but I also have never heard anyone in the back of the plane surviving after it hits the mountain.
Well, you know what the last thing that goes through a bug's mind before he hits the windshield?
What's that?
His ass.
Well,
all right.
A few questions that actually friends of mine have asked me to ask you. Scott Bowden, the host of Kentucky Fried Wrestling.
Well, he's no friend of mine. He still insists it was Mil Mascaras. We've debunked that. He's plagued me.
He has told me that you are very unpopular in Germantown, but Scott wanted to know about that Great American Bash show that Crockett did with Jerry Jarrett. There's a match. It's a bunkhouse match. I believe it's the Horsemen. Maybe Flair, Arn, and Ole versus Magnum, Dusty, and Jerry the King Lawler.
And Lawler.
He wanted to know if there was any backstory to the idea that during the match, there's action happening except with Lawler. It seems almost as if Ole Anderson gets him and holds him and hugs him and doesn't let Lawler do anything. Is there any backstory to that?
No, actually, not that I know of. I'm sure there was, if not a backstory, at least a front story. I don't know. Because I think we were was that the one we were on, or were we on the second one? No, that was the first one that they did, the first co-promotion. We weren't on that one, and it drew a huge house. And then we were on the second one that didn't do so well because they came back too quick. But I can see, here's the thing. Ole didn't like Tennessee wrestling because he thought it was silly. They weren't going to draw without Jerry Lawler in some featured position, which was evidenced by when we did the Great American Bash at the Liberty Bowl and had those, if it seats 80,000 people, we had 77,500 empty seats because it was the worst attended Great American Bash of all time because there was no Memphis TV didn't plug it, and there was no Jarrett Lawler Promotions presence on the card. After that was July 4th or 4th of July weekend of 1986. They had done the co-promotions. The first one, I believe, was the first $100,000 gate in Memphis wrestling history. The main event was what we're talking about, the 6-man bunkhouse match. They came back a couple months later. That's the show that we were on against the Fabulous Ones. And it only did 35 or 40 grand, whatever the figure was. It was significantly down because they would raise prices when they'd go in with these super shows. And because the first time was the first time ever, people went for it. It raised prices and see all those stars. But then when it happens again real quick, well, then they didn't bite so quick because they're still having matches every Monday night in Memphis every week. And then by the following year, Jarrett had decided, well, we draw these big houses when they come in, but then we're not doing as good when they're not here. And Jarrett had that spring of 86 to build up Dundee and Landel against Lawler and Mantell, and now they're selling out the Mid-South Coliseum on their own without Crockett's guys. So that's why Crockett came in the 4th of July weekend with one of the first Great American Bashes at the Liberty Bowl because we were doing all those stadiums and with no cooperation from Lawler and Jarrett, and it fucking died a horrible death. There weren't as many people at the Liberty Bowl than there were probably the following week inside of the Mid-South Coliseum. Anyway, having said that, Ole thought Tennessee wrestling was silly. They probably wanted to do their match that they had been doing, and not like they had a routine match, but they wanted to all work with each other. And Lawler was stuck in there because you had to have Lawler in a prominent position if you were going to draw a wrestling crowd at the Mid-South Coliseum, and that would have been the place that I would have put him. And that's probably where Jarrett fucking insisted he go. So I bet Ole was fucking around and holding him down so that he couldn't do anything, which, if so, just cheated the match because, those guys were great, but in Memphis, and if Lawler was allowed to call it, if Lawler was allowed to set it up, there's no way that even Flair, Arn, Ole, Dusty, and Magnum would have put together a better match. And I'm not talking about putting it together in advance. I'm talking about calling the whole thing in front of the people on the fly. Nobody was better than Jerry Lawler. Nick Bockwinkel said that. He hadn't been in 30 years. He hadn't been in the ring with anybody better at calling a match for those people. So I can imagine there were shenanigans, and it probably would have been a better match if they'd have left it alone.
Another question that a friend of mine has asked, Roman Gomez, who's the star of this week's episode of the Super Podcast. He's the fan that Marty Funk defaced his Dory Funk Jr. card after he got it signed.
He just vandalized it.
He wanted to know, apparently he saw an interview with you. I don't know which interview it was, where you said the worst thing you ever did in your career was the New Breed feud. And he wanted to know your memories of the New Breed feud and why exactly it was the worst thing you ever did.
No, I don't know whether he heard that right, because I don't think that was the worst thing I've ever done in my career. First of all, there's been so many other things. The new Midnight Express, for example. I think there was a time where there was a question recently asked, I should say. We talked about the little robot that they brought out. I was doing interviews on the TBS show. This had started to set this thing up, and I'm interviewing the New Breed, and they brought out their battery-operated robot that was supposed to talk and say shit, but it didn't. It malfunctioned, and they're trying to get around it, and it's dying. This whole thing is dying. And I'd talked about that being one of the that could have been possibly the worst moment, on national television, trying to interview a battery operated robot for the two guys from the future have. See, modern wrestling, there was always some silly shit and some stuff that actually was poorly. That was gone over ahead of time, and it didn't seem as silly or as sucky as it did when the shit malfunctioned and they just went sideways and started making their own shit up on the fly. But no, the New Breed, they were good guys to have them. I'll tell you one funny fucking story about the New Breed. And I was going to tell this in Richmond at the VIP when we were telling Big Bubba Rogers stories, and I forgot about it. But during this feud with the New Breed, and it was Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane. That was 87. Stan had just joined the team. And so he did a little karate, but Chris Champion fancied himself, and he did a little karate too. So they always tried to do a karate spot. Didn't work out as good as Stan's karate spots with Tracy Smothers, but. So they, we're trying to figure out ways to have good matches with them, and they're kind of green, and the people are kind of, skeptical. It ain't the Rock and Roll Express, let's put it that way. But they're good kids. But they're kind of caught up. This is the first time they've worked in Florida as a team, but Florida was on its deathbed at that point, and so they haven't really been in a high-profile situation. And other baby faces would have known this, but they didn't. We're at a spot show one night up in, I believe, Southern Virginia. And I don't mean to say this was a Crockett Promotions town, like a Hillsville, Virginia, or whatever, where we used to draw 1,500 or 2,000 people in these high school gyms in Virginia. Would pack them. So it was a big crowd, and they were wall to wall. And Bubba is with us at the time, Big Bubba Rogers. So he's my bodyguard, and everybody knew that Dusty had made Bubba to work with him. They'd just done the Bunkhouse Stampede thing earlier that year and set the record in Pittsburgh. Bubba was a main event guy that he was on par with Animal and Hawk of the Road Warriors or Dusty Rhodes. They would work on par with each other. But underneath, baby faces didn't just disrespect Bubba anywhere, even on spot shows. And also, we're still teaching Bubba. It's on the job training for Bubba. Also, he's been in the business a year. So he's getting to ride with the Midnight Express and learn about working in the ring. He's getting to ride with me, and I'm trying to explain to him about how to stay strong and get his gimmick over and these things. So anyway, the Midnight Express music plays, and out we go, and it's jam-packed high school gym. And then hear the New Breed music. And so since there's four of us, the Midnight Express, myself, and Big Bubba, we're not going to stand there in the ring when the New Breed get in the ring, because then they've got to kind of just stand there in their corner and do nothing, because we're occupying all the space, and they're not going to approach us. There's four of us. If they do approach us, as you'll find out, there should be trouble. So we just hear all the people cheering, and I get mad, and at midnight we get out of the ring, and we're standing there on the floor like we're fed up with all these people, and Bubba's close enough to the ring that when Chris Champion and Sean Royal get in and they're running around to the turnbuckles and everything, Chris Champion comes over the ropes, leans over the top rope, takes his hand, and flips Big Bubba's hat off of his head.
Ooh.
And the people popped. Not even popping cheering, but popping laughing. 1,500 fucking wrestling fans are laughing at Big Bubba Rogers. And he's still got the sunglasses on. He's still got the suit on, and he's bowed up like you can tell, why I oughta, but you can tell he doesn't know. His face gets red, and he's like not sure what to do. And I went up to him and I said, get in the ring, beat him up, and throw him out on the floor. And And as I'm telling him that, he's still like I'm holding him back, right? He's acting like I'm not holding him back. I've said, Bubba, I grab his arm, I jerk it. So he's looking at me. I said, get in the ring in a working way, beat them up, and throw them both to the floor. So he fucking gets in the ring, he gets up on the apron, and now he's starting to step through the ropes, and now the New Breed are both looking like, well, what the fuck? This is not supposed to happen. And he fucking gloms them, and they start fighting back because they're baby faces, and he doesn't sell anything because he doesn't sell anything anyway, right? But he especially doesn't sell it. He basically, through force of his 360 pounds, and because I had told him to do something, he didn't hurt them, but he physically overwhelmed them and made them take bumps to the through them, shoved them out through the ropes to the floor. And then we got back in the ring, me and the Midnight Express, and now the people are like, ooh. And now I'm holding Bubba back because so he doesn't go out on the floor and kill him, right? Now I'm holding Bubba back. I'm telling him, no, don't hurt the little kids no more, Bubba, right? Now we put everybody back in the right position. Now I think Earl Hebner was the referee, either Hebner or Tommy Young, but it was up in Virginia. It's probably Hebner. I had him come over and I said, go tell them, if they're ready to start this match, then we'll do some high spots for them right before we get to heat on them and then beat them like we're going to in this finish. So they got back in with their head down kind of and everything. And then Bobby and Dennis did some high spots for them and put them over. Then we got some heat on them. They made a comeback and we beat them. That was the finish anyway. We were always going over. So what they did was, instead of starting out in the people's minds as you know, oh wow, they're kicking the shit out of the Midnight Express, these guys might be something, and then the heat, and then oh shit, we're mad because they got beat. Then it was, well, this one guy just beat both of them up and dumped them out to the floor like sacks of shit, and then they got a little offense in on the Midnight Express, and then the Midnight Express beat him too, all because Chris Champion was not a bad guy in that respect. He just lost his head and didn't realize that he had crossed the line, and he had embarrassed a main event heel in front of a lot of fucking people and had to pay the price for it. So the new breed did not get over very well that night in fucking Chesterfield, Virginia, or wherever the fuck it was. But you should have seen the look on their fucking faces. It was like when I told Leviathan that night, Batista, to go in the ring and beat the shit out of Russ McCullough. I've told you that story, right?
I don't remember. That may have been during one of the OVW deep dives.
I don't even think it was. We got this bar show, this club, bar, whatever, in Huntington, West Virginia, offered to pay us like $3,000 for just a small show in their bar, right? It was, all right, let's see if nobody's running Huntington at that point. Let's see if there's anything to this. If these people can promote locally, we'll try one. So we go over there. The TV doesn't air there. So all the guys up and down the card, it's they've just came to, and there's a couple of hundred people there, so we didn't end up doing it again. But they've just come to see wrestling. They don't really know any of these people. They know me, but I'm the matchmaker of OVW at the time, so I just did an interview or two, right? So their first impression, but this is a good training crowd, because their first impression of guys, if it's different than what it's supposed to be, that means the guy's not projecting himself properly, right? If they can't tell who the babyface and the heel is when they see them, then somebody's not doing their fucking job. And also it tells you when you get over with people that have never seen you before, but when they react to your match, you're doing something right. So the cold crowds sometimes were useful. So we had old big Russ McCullough, 7 feet tall. Remember, we laughed. He picked his own theme music. It was Stone Temple Pilots, and the title of the song was Dead and Bloated.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was 7 feet, but he didn't have any muscular definition at all. And it was just 7 feet, 325 pounds. And I think he'd played some basketball. And they sent him to us because he was WWE developmental. And then I think they sent him to Dutch in Puerto Rico, tried for Dutch to get something out of him. And I think he just broke down and had a nervous breakdown and quit the business down here. Anyway, Russ McCullough is a babyface. But he's a big Nash looking fucker. He wears the over the shoulder fucking top to hide his flabby upper body, and these big leather long pants. And he's got that fucking rotten music that I couldn't talk him out of, and saw that it was just diminishing returns. Why waste a good song on this fucking guy, right? So he's got that music and that look, and when he walks out, the people boo him, even though he's gonna be the baby face. Well, because he looks like a big fucking dick, right? Well, instead of waiting to see what comes next, which is Leviathan, the demon of the deep, the guardian of the gates of hell, with his obnoxious manager, the Wicked Witch of Kentuckiana Sin herself, who could get heat in an ice flow with a live crowd. I always had to watch people try to go over the rail for her because it's like they knew her personally. Instead of waiting for them to come out and having the match that they were going to have that would indicate that, what everybody was doing, right? just because some of the drunks in the bar started heckling fucking Russ McCullough and booing him, he gets the microphone and cuts a heel promo on him. So now, by the time he finishes pissing off these drunks and a few more of them that came in that were friends of theirs and telling them they didn't know what they were fucking talking about and just the obnoxious demeanor that he had, I could have sent goddamn Saddam Hussein out and they would have cheered him, right? So I said, okay, I got Leviathan and Sin. I said, okay, now's here where you learn how to be a babyface and get over. Go out there, beat the shit out of him, and beat him with a spear 1, 2, 3 in 60 seconds or less. He's what? I said, go out there. But I said, go out there and always have to put in a working way, beat the shit out of him, sell nothing, beat him with a spear in 60 seconds or less. So here goes Leviathan's music, right? What was that fucking song we played? Voodoo, right? Doom, 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 doom. And when those people who have already been pissed off by this lump of a fucking underneath wrestler sees Leviathan, that fucking body and that gimmick, they didn't care that he had a manager, and she wasn't going to have time to get any heat, and they're the baby faces anyway. The place blew. They look at him, and Leviathan goes in the ring and just gloms Russ, and you see the conversation, because Russ ain't selling it first, but neither's Leviathan. They're just windmilling each other, and Leviathan's telling him, Cornette said so, and you see Russ start to slowly sell, boom, 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 and then fucking Leviathan hit him with the three things he was doing at the time. I think it was a full Nelson fucking slam and then shot him off and speared him 1, 2, 3, right? Boom. And the place blew again. That's the way you get a fucking baby face over, right? And so then they come back and Batista goes, is that what you wanted? I said, that was perfect. And then here comes Russ McCullough. And he actually has tears in his eyes. He wasn't hurt. This wasn't a shoot. He was just hurt that he was defeated in front of these people in such a convincing fashion after he had talked big because they'd fucking hurt his feelings by booing him. And he's pouting. He said, well, why did you do that? I swear to God, why did you do that? I said, because you go out there and you cut a fucking promo turning yourself heel that you weren't supposed to cut. And you wouldn't have been a fucking heel if you'd let the heel do his job. But since you're changing shit around, I changed shit around and I showed you how to get a baby face over. So then he's supposed to be on ring crew helping the fucking guys tear the ring down and load it up in the trailer. But this was either 2000 or 2001. He had a cell phone. I think he had to stay in touch with his wife or whatever. So instead of helping the guys, he sat in the car on the phone, either talking to his wife or potentially calling the office trying to bitch because we were mistreating him so badly because he was a big baby. But yeah, it always had that. Hit the ring and in a working way, beat the fuck out of that stupid motherfucker.
Well,
I'm trying to think when the last time was I said, because I've said that here within the last year or two somewhere. In a working way, beat the fuck out of that stupid motherfucker. I can't remember.
Jim, before we get to our next question, a little bit of news here. One of your biggest fans, Aiden Heckel, who listens to your show each and every day on his way home from school, was just named Student of the Year. So we want to say congratulations to Aiden.
Congratulations, Aiden. I always knew you were smarter than your old man.
Hey, well, don't say that.
Well, it's true.
Travis, he's plenty smart.
He's plenty smart. He's real good on that book learning.
Let's get another question.
Boy, I tell you what. You know, the thing is, when Travis Heckel graduated 4th grade, he was so excited he could hardly shave without cutting himself. Did you realize that?
Oh, will you stop it?
Did you realize that 3rd grade was the happiest 5 years of Travis Heckel's life?
Now, that's not true.
And finally, when he got into high school, he had just turned 30. He won a letter in football, and then he was trying to ask around to find somebody to read it to him.
All right, Jimmy. That's enough, Jimmy. We've heard enough.
He did win that gold medal and then took it out and had it bronzed. But that was the day after. That was a rough game because he had stayed up all the night before studying for his urine test. So,
can we get Eddie out here?
Yeah, Eddie. Can we get Eddie out?
All right, his next question was sent in on Twitter using the hashtag CornyDriveThru from Old School Wrestling. Old School Wrestling, if I'm going to do this correctly.
Yeah.
I stole this from the Wrestling Classics message board. But would it be conceivable in 1984 that Ric Flair spent more money on spilt liquor than Buddy Landel made? I mean, if you do the math, it's starting to make sense. And I pulled up the thread here, and they actually did do the math.
In 1984, honestly and truthfully, no. If you took the word spilled out of that sentence, then that's a new equation. Buddy Landel in 1984, Buddy was with us in Louisiana, right?
Yeah.
And I know what we made, and I know what his position on the card was. I would say that Buddy had to, but see, here's the thing, there's the fines. But let's say that Buddy was never fined by Bill Watts for any infractions of being late or whatever the case may be. Buddy had to be a $60,000 or $65,000 guy, because even the opening match guys were having some $1,000 weeks. We made about 100. And we were main event, but we weren't in main events through the entire year, because a couple of times after we'd come out on the short end of a program with a babyface team, they would give us somebody else like the PYTs that was designed for us to have a few go rounds with them and ultimately get over. They wouldn't get the last word, so we'd get strong for the rock and roll to come back, blah, blah, blah. So we weren't in all the main events, but easily. So Flair, and especially in 1984, the Carolinas were not doing record business. But having said that, if you took spilled liquor out, I can believe that Ric Flair could have spent $1,000 a week on bar tabs easily.
You want me to read you some of this? The math they tried to figure out.
Okay.
It's really interesting. The story has been sampled in rap songs, and legend has it Buddy never fully recovered from the brutality of that burn. But could this claim have actually been true? Let's run some numbers. For ease of math, I'm using current day numbers, and if someone wants to, they can adjust for inflation. I believe Rick made this claim in 1985, and therefore we are comparing the amount Rick spent on spilled liquor, also known as unconsumed liquor that was splashed out of the glass and not into anyone's mouth, to Buddy Landel's 1984 earnings. I believe Landel was in Mid-South in 1984, which is correct. Some reasonable assumptions. Ric Flair went out to bars 300 times in 1984. At each bar, he ordered 99 kamikaze. If I recall his 30 for 30 correctly, Rick said he drank about 10 beers and 5 cocktails a day. It's been said that in order to keep up his image, but also in order to function, Rick would serve.
Come on, this man's had health issues recently. We shouldn't be laughing, but this is interesting. Go ahead.
Rick would toss every other drink into a plant or something. So in order to drink 10 beers and 5 kamikazes, he's tossing another 10 and 5 into the shrubbery. Also, the remaining 89 kamikazes, you figure about another 5 worth are getting lost in the splashing from people clinking glasses and going cheers, or simply from knocking them over in raucous party fashion. You also have the fact that Rick would pick up the tab for others at these bars. Drinks are on the champ. Woo! Now, I
swear to God, by the way, I did get an email recently, I don't have it in front of me, from a guy who said that his mother told him stories about when Ric Flair bought everybody in the place drinks at Cheers in Johnson City, Tennessee after a show at Freedom Hall. So that has happened on more than one occasion.
Now, whether or not he actually paid what he owed versus stiffing the bar is another subject, but for our purposes, we are treating this as a liability to Rick. And under the
I do not have any evidence that he ever stiffed a bar. Maybe a credit card company later on, I don't know, but I think all the bartenders got well taken care of.
Let me fast forward a little bit here. And of those many drinks bought for others, let's say an average of 10 drinks worth got knocked over or sloshed out of glasses. Or if others were doing like Rick and tossing them aside when no one was looking, and as some have admitted to, spilled that way. So that's 10 spilled beers and 10 spilled kamikazes and 10 spilled miscellaneous drinks per night for 300 nights. I'm presuming these are kamikaze shots and therefore cheaper than a double or a full well drink. So let's say that in 2019 dollars, the average cost of each beer and kamikaze is $5. Let's say the miscellaneous spilled drinks average $5. $5 times 30 drinks equals $150 in spilled drinks per night. $150 times 300 nights equals $45,000 in spilled liquor. Would Buddy Landel have made more than that in 1984 dollars? Wasn't it J.J. Dillon in his book that claimed that most wrestlers were earning way less than they claimed? Buddy wasn't a big star in 1984 as far as I know. I think it's possible Rick's claim was accurate, and this post was made by a gentleman named Vulture.
Well, I just went over Buddy's estimated salary. And J.J. Dillon is right also. Most wrestlers didn't make anywhere near what they said they made. However, I've heard Buddy in public in 1984 bragging that he made more money than the President of the United States, which at that time I think was 120 something grand. So he was lying, but he was still making. By the way, he did that. He got mad that we were in the Dallas airport eating at the fucking buffet gimmick. And he got mad at the guy for some reason. And he was behind me in the line. I'm trying to hurry up. And he's like, okay, brother, no problem. I make more money than the President of the United States last year, by God.
I once heard you use that line. Did you get that from Buddy?
Yes. Of course. And I used it in a wrestling promo situation rather than telling somebody at the fucking buffet, right? I hope. I don't know. Possibly I didn't. But yeah, okay, hold on here now. Well, let's just go. We're just going to go to the old inflation calculator. Wait a minute. Hold on. Just talk to the people for 1 second.
We are doing mathematics here, ladies and gentlemen, to figure out the spilled drink value.
Well, no. Now we're not on spilled drinks now. I am saying because of the Midnight Express's earnings of just under $100,000 in 1984, that Buddy Landel, since he was there for pretty much the whole year, I believe, with us, and his placement on the card in Mid-South Wrestling would have probably made somewhere around 65 or 70, I would bet, right? Because I saw some of these checks. I know the Pat Rose, when he was just an opening match guy, but business was good during warm weather that summer. He was remarking he was having $1,000 week, right? So hold on here a second. In 1984, let's say Buddy made $65,000, being on the card and featured as Butch Reed's sidekick and in some important matches.
Yeah, especially as the year went on.
Yes. That today is equal to just under $160,000. So that's what an upper mid-card heel was making in 1984 in Mid-South Wrestling. And once again, I don't have Buddy's books, but I know what mine was. Let's go for 100. What were the main event guys making? That is the equivalent today of $245,955 in today's money. So, yes, but wrestlers always back in the 70s, when they were interviewed by the news on TV or in newspapers, they would say, oh, I make six figures or I make $100,000. If you said you made $100,000 back in those days, that sounded pretty fucking good. So they would say that. Lawler, actually, he did a number of interviews in the mid 70s and his world title matches coming up or whatever, saying that, wrestling was a big business for him and he would probably make $150,000 that year. And actually, with what I know now about having percentages of things, he may have not even been embellishing that much. Let's see. And hold on here.
In terms of the Ric Flair show at the bar, you talked about recently on the show that you would usually go back to your hotel room, get some pizza, get some chips, maybe hang out with some female companion.
Friends.
And that would be the night. Did you ever experience the Ric Flair show in the bar?
No, only a couple of times in passing. Especially like if I was going down to the hotel front desk to get some change for the Coke machine back before they took bills, things like that. You would see some of the carnage erupting. But I rode with Rick a few times when I was on the creative team, the booking committee, whatever they were calling it in WCW at that point. But no, I didn't get involved in those type of things. But I will say now, just for example, I saw one of Ric Flair's checks during the spring of 1986. This was not this was not snooping. This was an inadvertent glance. On Wednesdays at Crockett's office on Briar Bend Drive in Charlotte, we would do the promos, as we've talked about, local promos all day from like 9 in the morning until 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And that's also where we would get paid. I mean, you know, for the underneath guys, Denny Brown, they'd bring the checks to Raleigh or whatever on Wednesday night or where we were, so whatever. But for the guys that were the top baby faces and heels that did local promos, you would get your check on Wednesday when they were ready about noonish or whatever. You'd go in and one of the secretaries, there were 3 nice old ladies, they would have it for you. So I went in one time and asked for my check, and she said, "Oh, yes, just 1 second. We're just finishing them up now." And as she turns to go through this stack of envelopes, I'm piddling around, look down at the desk, and there's Ric Flair's check. And it's not an envelope, right? And I'm, oh, shit. And I look at the total real quick, and I about piss myself because I'd never seen a wrestling check that size at that point. And then I take mine and go on about my merry way. And I think I used to take the midnights to them also. But we looked at ours. That was during the Midnight Rock and Roll, the first run. So this is like March of 86-ish or whatever, where houses were great. We made, I believe, that week with the Midnight Rock and Roll match being underneath Flair and Dusty, our check was like $4,500 a piece, right? Rick's was for $14,000 some odd dollars. I didn't get real fucking close, right? So that was for a week, and he had been the main event when we'd been on. And of course, it's a tag team match where you're splitting money 5 ways versus a single main event where you're splitting it 2 ways, and one's the world champion and the other one's the fucking booker. So, but there was a disparity. But that $14,000 week, and this wasn't without pay-per-view. There was no pay-per-view involved. There wasn't even a Starrcade or a goddamn big stadium show. It was just fucking regular business. That's the equal of $32,642.99 today.
Well, if he was making that in the spring, how much would you guess he was making during the bash in the summer?
Well, here's the thing. This is printed in the Midnight Express book. We got a check for $17,000 for the 14 bashes. And there were only 14 Great American Bashes. The rest of the dates that summer were just regular shows, and we were paid, on the regular checks. But then at the end of the month period, they paid all the bashes in one because everybody was expecting 14 Starrcades, right? And it didn't work out that way. But our total it's on my wall and it's on the book and I can't see either, but I can't remember. I'll just round it off. Our total for the month of July, me and the Midnight Express, was $22,000. So that today is $51,296. That's what we made for the month of July. Now, I refuse to believe this, but since Flair's check was 3 times what ours was when I accidentally saw his and we were the semifinal to his main event every night, then if we took that fucking equation and said, okay, Flair made 3 times as much as us in the month of July, that would be $66,000 then and $153,888 now.
Wow.
Well, I don't believe that because I think people would have heard about that fucking check. However, since we made $22,000, there's no doubt in my mind that Ric Flair, the world champion, who was on the main event of every card, we were semifinal in some. A couple of times we were main event because we were in with Dusty and Magnum and Baby Doll, and the cage had to go on last because you had to put the cage up, right? But Ric Flair was the advertised main event of every one of those. He had to make 40. He had to make 40. And that's the equivalent of 93 grand. And I mean, unless, once again, I can speak with truth and documentation about my earnings. I have everything written down I ever fucking made, right? So I can, without fear of contradiction, give you these statistics, and then I can look at other people who were featured on the same cards in sometimes more prominent positions. And you mean to tell me that Jim Crockett was paying Ric Flair the same thing as the Midnight Express in 1986? No, especially during the one time that I did see something, he paid him 3 times as much. Of course, those were for a couple of big sellout houses, and Rick was on top. And when the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express sold out Columbia, South Carolina, the Township Auditorium, for the first time since I believe they said 1978, it was an actual legitimate sellout in Columbia, the first time in 8 years. Normally, you made $200 or $300 or $400 or $500 in Columbia, depending on where you were on the card and what the house was at best, right? We got $1,000 a piece because that was something special. He said, here, you guys did something that all my other stars haven't been able to do in 8 years. Here's a fucking $1,000 a piece. You were 80 miles from your house. Had one 15-minute match. I'll take that. But a lot of times you would, the promoter had since he made it all up anyway, he made up the formulas and the fucking mathematical equations to figure out how much money you got paid. So if he wanted to fucking take care of you because you had done something good for the territory, he would. So I can't imagine that Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes as the equal top star to Flair on the babyface side and the booker. You think he ain't making twice what we're making at least? So if you figure that, then that means that Dusty and Flair were both making, $400,000 plus for 1986.
Where do you think 86 ranks for Ric Flair, at least until he went to the WWF? Because obviously they start having pay-per-views in 87, 88, but it's not like they really have much strength. And then there's minimal merchandising. Do you think 86 is the peak for Ric Flair or Crockett Promotions?
Boy,
money-wise?
Well, but see, also remember when the territories, when he had the belt first couple of years, when the territories were still strong and he was going to Japan and working for Baba on a regular basis, because Baba was paying him more than Crockett was. And he'd go to St. Louis and get a $5,000 or $6,000 payoff in one night for those sellouts, as we've got documentation on.
Yeah, we know those payoffs, yeah.
So,
Dallas,
all through.
Did Dallas pay him well, or was Dallas cheap with him?
Well, what was it they said one time about when you go to work for Bill Watts, you'll make half what you should make and twice as much as anybody else will pay you. When you're in the main event with the promoter's son in Texas Stadium in front of 40,000 fucking people and $400,000 house, he probably made out okay regardless. So yeah, I mean, and that was 1984. And I'm trying to think, well, we know that in equivalent payoffs, when Bruno and Zbyszko did the Shea Stadium mega house, that was 400 something grand. Bruno's payoff was 29 grand, and Zbyszko quit over getting 22. And Ric Flair was the NWA champion on a $400,000 house in Dallas, Texas. It didn't have anywhere near the rent that they did in Shea Stadium, and was kind enough to do the job and put the promoter's son over in memory of his deceased son. My God, there was the entire 80s, there was significant money changing hands in a lot of these territories. And then when you go back to the 70s, before Rick, Terry Funk, admits he quit the NWA title basically because he'd split up with Vicky and wanted to go back and straighten that out, which he did, and they were together another 40 years or whatever. But that was more important to him. But when you're making a quarter of what was $250,000, let's just say, and that's not an awkward or outrageous figure for the NWA champion to have been making in the late 70s. Let's put in 1977 and say 250 grand is light. That's $1,054,000 today. But you had no life. You were always on the road, and that's why everybody except Lou Thez and Ric Flair eventually wanted to give the belt back.
Yeah, I was just reading Steve Verrier's Gene Kiniski book, and it's the same thing. He eventually was like, "Okay, I'm ready to go home. I can't do this anymore."
Yeah. But that was that was the most sought after job in wrestling, because from a period of 1972 through 1982, the three highest paid guys in the business would have been the NWA champion, Bruno Sammartino, and Andre the Giant. I mean, when I say in the business, Inoki and Baba was a whole different fucking economy over there.
Well, Baba was a league of his own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Inoki burned through his and whoever else's money with a great regular. But, besides the kingpins of Japanese wrestling, the three highest paid guys for the decade of the 70s were Andre, Bruno, and the NWA champion. And if that was, we've talked about Bruno would have almost had to been over $300,000 without seeing these guys' tax returns.
And can you imagine if he decided, you know what, I'm going to work a full schedule this year?
Oh, good Lord. Yeah. And that was not doing spot shows.
Yeah. That was the major towns. And then every now and then he would go into Japan for Baba, or he would go to Indianapolis. But it was Bruno just picking and choosing what he wanted to do.
And then when you had, as we've talked about, when you had $1 million town that would gross $1 million a year, and the booker or top star had a piece of it, I don't know. Memphis didn't gross probably $1 million most years, although that would only be an average of $20,000, 50 times a year. But even still, then back in the 70s, probably didn't gross $1 million. But, when Lawler ended up in the early 80s with 10% and they started doing those big houses, you could see where he could easily do between 100 to 150 just on his piece of Memphis. So there was money in wrestling. It just, everybody didn't get it. And it became the old cliche that, all the guys got fucked around and taken advantage of. Well, many did. Many more did than didn't. But a lot of guys under this shady fly-by-night system made a fucking fortune. Whether they all kept it is up for debate. But in the old days, under this old system, and with many things happening in cash, you could make a fucking fortune if you got to be a main event guy and figured into a fucking promotion, to a territory.
Well, Jim, before we wrap things up, let's get one last question here. This one was sent in via email from Amir. And there's an image attached to it, and I will describe what it is in a moment. Hey, Jim, I know about your whole tirade against Tim Horner, and it is epic. But I was watching an episode of World Championship Wrestling from December 13th, 1986 on the WWE Network, and during a Tim Horner match, this graphic pops up. And there's an image here of Tim Horner. He has someone in an armbar, Scrappy McGowan, looking right into the camera. And then there's an image at the bottom of the screen that says Terra Stories instead of Territories. And it's Bob Caudle holding a microphone to Tim Horner in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And it says, Tim Horner founded Smoky Mountain Wrestling with Jim Cornette, Stan Lane, and Sandy Scott in 1991. Jim, what are your thoughts on this? And why has this misconception been accepted as truth? Can't you get Stephen P. New to sue Horner and get to the bottom of this? And overall, how do you feel about Tim Horner as a wrestler? Well, see, that doesn't even come from Horner, because Horner to Stan Lane would be interested to know that he had something to do with it. And I don't really recall Stan pulling his weight on that big startup, since he had nothing to do with it. No, I guess people assumed because it was me that Stan was in on it at first, or that's been written somewhere. Horner did tell people that he was, one of the owners. And actually, after I fired him, did tell people around Morristown to save his face, such as it was, that he had sold out and sold his piece. It didn't have anything to do with it anymore, whatever. And I would always make mention when somebody would come up to me and unsolicited tell me, yeah, I know Tim Horner, he sold his piece. No, he didn't ever have a piece. He didn't have anything to sell. He got fired. But I don't know where a lot of this comes from otherwise than people write it on the internet and then they take it as fact. But Sandy obviously was part of the thing from day one, because Sandy had worked for Crockett so many years, knew all the building managers, knew a lot of the television station general managers, etc., knew how to promote towns, how to get sponsors, the sponsors in terms of the spot shows, like the local fire department or police department wants to raise money, not sponsors like buying commercial time on television. He was from the start.
And I've told the story that, we smartened Horner up to what we were doing because he was going to bilk some fucking mark in Knoxville for $40,000 to start his own promotion so he could be the star. And I didn't want him to muddy the water. So I said, don't do that, because he thought, $40,000, it will start him a promotion that he can turn a profit with for, after that. He'd just have burnt some TV station and flopped right in front of us, and that would have been bad. So we smartened him up to what we were doing. That's why he was involved. And then, it went from there. But, he got the big head and thought that he was, he thought he was fucking the dog instead of just holding its head. So, but Stan, had no ownership. Probably if Stan was to see that, he'd go, fuck. They'll sue me. They'll sue me if somebody's still mad at him. I didn't have anything to do with it.
I think Stan's all right as long as he doesn't return to Florida.
Yeah, yes, he is. He still may have some outstanding situations going on there, but they've probably all graduated college by now.
Well, with that, the drive-thru has closed. It was one of those episodes, folks. Of course, you could hear the Jim Cornette Experience when it debuts each and every Thursday, wherever it is that you find your favorite podcast. This week, a big episode. We review Double or Nothing, the big all-elite pay-per-view event. Find out what Jim thought this week on The Experience. And of course, you can hear The Experience and the Drive-Thru full episodes on the official YouTube page, tinyurl.com/official corny YouTube, or just go to YouTube and search for Jim Cornette. We have a lot of really cool video projects that are going to be coming up, and we got such a big reaction to the OVW Deep Dive Omnibus. We're going to have a few more omnibuses. Omnibus, I guess that's how you say it.
Listen, I'd rather have, if it's all right, I'd rather have an Uber than have to get on the bus again.
I can't see you taking an Uber anywhere. Have you ever done an Uber?
I just did it in fucking New York, I guess. I was, I don't know if it was Ubers or whatever. I was in a little bit of everything that was rolling with wheels in New York for MLW in April, which is why I won't be visiting New York in the near future.
Who got you the Uber? Because usually people use their smartphones to get an Uber, and you certainly
that was part of the deal, that it was arranged by MLW. I don't know if it was Uber. The guy was, he had a license and everything. I think it wasn't Uber. It was, a car service, and they had a nice car and everything. But they just arrived at the hotel, and all I had to be was waiting there. And then Brandy, the travel girl, every morning I'm getting in the car, right? And she's calling my phone, and I'm stopped. I put my bags down and I'm stopped to answer the phone. Yes, Brandon, your car's there. I know, I'm getting in it. And then I realized when I talked to her, I was like, why are you calling me constantly? Because she has to do that with everybody else in the wrestling business. I'm there 10 minutes early waiting for the fucking ride. I'm contacting them if something's gone sideways. A lot of times they just see me when I show up where I'm supposed to be. They've had no contact with me whatsoever, but I'm there and I'm early. But I've come to find out that I'm still apparently the only person like that in wrestling.
Once again, really cool video projects coming.
Yeah, really cool.
The official Jim Cornette YouTube channel. So subscribe now and check in each and every day to see what we have in store for you. And remember, classic Jim Cornette clips are available on the Arcadian Vanguard video channel. Maybe you want to hear Jim's epic rant about Tim Horner after this previous segment we just did.
I don't think they will. No, not after that segment.
tinyurl.com/corny YouTube for that. You can follow Jim on Twitter at the Jim Cornette. You can follow me on Twitter at Great Brian Last. You can hear me on the 605 Super Podcast at 605pod.com, or available wherever it is that you find your very favorite podcast. And of course, we want to remind you about Cornette's Collectibles at jimcornette.com, your one-stop shop for t-shirts, burger towels, autograph photos, restraining orders, soon-to-be action figures, soon-to-be collectible comic books. What am I forgetting, and what am I screwing up as I say this here?
I don't know, but I wish you'd hurry up, because I have to go check the consistency of baby's poop. And just for everybody that wants to send the get well wishes, it's at Quinnerooney on Twitter.
Wasn't that the page that was hacked a few years ago by a lingerie model?
Yes, somebody hacked poor puppy. And Stacy wrote, boy, you got to lead a really shitty life to have to hack a dog's Twitter page. But at Quinnerooney for well wishes. I'm going to go check baby's poop. You go ahead and finish this up now.
Find out which dog we'll be hacking this week on The Experience on Thursday. But until then, for Jim Cornette, I'm the Great Brian Last. Tally-ho!